Hi, this is Paul, and this is what I know as Food Truck Emily from Twitter. And she started, I don't know when, well, let's when did you first find me in this corner? You talked a little bit of that in your introduction video.
It was sometime this year. I
Okay.
was, actually, so Jonathan Pajot had started talking about that hideous strength. And
Ah, that's
so
right.
I went back and like read the trilogy, and I had already been like reworking through all of C.S. Lewis stuff. And so, but I didn't have anyone to talk to about it. And I
That's
harassed
right.
everybody I know trying to start like some kind of book club or something, and it just didn't take. So I scoured all the podcasts looking for something. And then I got on YouTube and I saw your video. And at first because it wasn't like high quality video or anything. Um, but then you'd start talking. Like as soon as you were talking about C.S. Lewis, I was like, you could just tell you were you were drawing in from a lot of different
Yeah.
things. And I was like, okay, I like this guy. Well, then YouTube started serving me up more of your videos. And I was like, oh, he listens to the same people I've been listening to. And so I started listening. As soon as I discovered you had audio form only, I went over to podcast.
Yeah.
And I just didn't take the time to stop and realize that because you'd be mentioning people I had no idea who they were, you know? Um, like people within the corner. And so finally I just got curious enough that I went over to actual YouTube. And I think I made like one comment on something, and then you actually responded, and I was like, oh, there's an actual person there. And yeah, and then I just got like kind of addicted, I guess.
How did you find Peugeot?
um yeah, through Jordan Peterson.
Okay.
And what's kind of interesting is the first time I heard Pajot, I was so put off by him because it was this episode where Jordan was clearly in just deep spiritual pain over his physical pain.
Yeah.
And I was so underwhelmed by his responses. And I was like, that's what a Christian has to tell somebody about their human suffering. And
Mhm.
so at first I didn't care for him, but then over time I started listening to him here and there too.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
let's get down to business. Now, you've already sort of made a little splash, yet you didn't make a huge splash, which is interesting. I'm always, because the corner is, I think about the corner as sort of a conscious entity.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just interesting to see how things happen in it, because nobody is controlling it really, contrary to some people's imaginations. So let's go all the way back and let's do this Randos thing properly.
Okay.
Tell me about the home you grew up in.
Well, hmm. By the time I was born, my parents are actually missionaries in Mexico.
Oh,
But they got kicked out of the ministry, and it
oh,
completely turned my family's life upside down.
oh.
And so my parents had been converts out of like the Jesus movement.
Yep.
So like your whole thing about that movie, I
Yep.
found really interesting because I recognized so much out of that story.
Yep.
So it was really more like a power thing within
Yep.
the ministry. I think there was an insecurity in the authority and in the leadership. And
Yep.
so some of these young guys who there was a lot going on with them.
Yep.
My dad is a very he's one of those, he's like you, he reminds me like you, but only an introvert. So everyone was opening up to him and
Hmm.
coming to him with their problems. And I
Yep.
think they felt his influence was too much. I don't know. He wasn't doing anything bad.
Yeah.
But they ended up sending him off to Mexico, maybe I don't know the full story, but maybe to get him away from the group.
Okay.
And then he kind of describes that the leadership flew down and interrogated him in the hotel room on his theology. He's a young believer at that point, and in the end, they decided that because he doesn't speak in tongues and that he must not have the Holy Spirit, or I don't know what. So they kicked him out. And so here they were, you know, they're from Southern Illinois, where the only jobs are coal mining and farming. My dad was a coal miner, and my mom had been the daughter of a farmer. But my dad's actually was a musician and in a rock and roll band. So, but that was the only work available. So here they are in Texas, and no marketable skills, three little kids, no community. Their entire
Mm.
lives fell apart. So my first memories of childhood were of just my mother having a complete breakdown in the middle of a store. That's my very first memory, was of my mom
Wow.
just breaking down, staring at a shelf. And I probably, she couldn't afford what was on the
Yeah.
shelf. I just
Yeah.
imagined that was
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Um, and so there was a real scramble to find work. And by the time I was 4, they decided that my dad should become a truck driver. So he was gone all the time except for 1 or 2 days out of the month. And he was putting my mom through school. So she's working and going to school. So, I'm maybe a typical lower
Yeah.
income
Yeah.
story of like the kids are kind of left to their own, latchkey kids in the
Yeah.
80s. And we just wandered around a lot. My older sister took care of us.
Hmm.
She was very much the nurturing, motherly kind.
Hmm.
And she was like really into literature and poetry and theater. So that was kind of like a lot of my influence then. Um, and then, without, I'd say, the protection of a father figure in the home, I became very easy prey to my best friend's dad, my next door neighbor. He ended up being a pedophile. And so that was like a really bad start, I'd say, was in the middle of all this like falling apart of all the like community, spiritual, like everything happening in our family. Just there was just this pervasive loneliness that I felt like got exploited,
Yeah.
and more than just the abuse itself, I think the whole thing was traumatic. And back then, I don't think they did a good job with kids, in counseling and stuff like that. My mom was afraid to even talk about it, that she'd
Yeah.
make it worse. And
Yeah.
I just had this deep sense of shame that I can't even describe. Like it was, I felt 100% like it was my fault.
Yeah.
And I would say too, that's when I became really fixated on the idea of God, actually.
Mm.
Um, my family wasn't, at this point, my dad was super cynical, couldn't even talk about God anymore.
Mm.
And that lasted for a good 7 years. And my mom was trying to kind of hold it together in a sense, like occasionally
Yeah.
taking us to church if she could manage. But
Yeah.
there was just nothing real going on there. And I just felt this desperation for God to save me. And I didn't even know who God was or what that meant.
Yeah.
Um, so I had a real rough time in school. I was very sick all the time. Like, I mean, now I know it's anxiety.
Yeah.
I was vomiting every morning before school.
Yeah.
I withdrew. I couldn't manage relationships with other kids. The teachers didn't like me. I was weird as fuck, like weird. Um, I remember actually standing in a hallway in elementary school and I think I would sort of like dissociate a little bit,
Mhm.
and just looking at all around me and just thinking I'm not like anybody anymore. Um, the whole police involvement was very traumatizing.
Yeah.
The year that the whole court situation happened, I don't remember that entire year pretty much.
Yeah.
So I must have just like blocked all of that out.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think so somewhere around middle school. So I had, like I said, just that shame that I could not shake. And then I had a very bad relationship with my mother. It was very much,
Yeah.
it felt like couldn't do anything right kind of situation.
Yeah.
And she's probably very Enneagram 1, I think. I don't know
Yeah.
if that means anything to you, but
I've never done the dive into the Enneagram
yeah,
stuff,
well,
so
well, that's for another day. I'm not like in the Enneagram cult or whatever, but it's helpful sometimes. Very much rules and not a
mm,
lot of emotion. There wasn't like
okay.
a lot of feeling of connection, and that comes a lot from her side of I mean, all the generations in my family are messed up, unfortunately. Um,
Mm,
yeah, just not knowing how to handle stuff. And anyway, I started, self-mutilating and just started obsessing over, it's not like I was suicidal, but it was on my mind all the time of
mm,
that, like, how long do I have to do this? How
mhm,
long is this life going to be? And I
mhm.
felt desperate to get out, and I couldn't really imagine it being better. So I prayed all the time. I remember just pretty much every night. And I felt like if I didn't pray, like I would wake up in the middle of the night to pray because I was afraid that if I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
doing it all perfectly, that God wouldn't look at me or wouldn't save me. And I didn't even know what all that meant, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Mm-hmm.
And then my dad finally quit truck driving, and he had another like whole life turnaround, came back to faith, and they started going to church. And so here I've never
Mm-hmm.
really been really in a community of church and stuff. And it's the first time I really started looking at the Bible. And you might get a kick out of this though, because the thing during that time was Calvinism versus Arminianism.
Mm-hmm.
I just remember coming into youth group and the pastor was constantly like drilling into us that we're saved and we can't lose our salvation. And I'm just looking around at all these kids who've got, I don't know, I just thought they had bad character. And I'm like,
Yeah.
why do you keep telling us that we're saved? So I actually started reading the Bible because I wanted to argue with him. And I just remember him pulling me aside one day and just saying, Emily, you're just really abrasive. And I love him to this day. Like I'm still friends with him, but he was not wrong. I was like this 12-year-old lawyer that came. I mean, I came with my receipts. I came prepared. I had a notebook full of all the scriptures I had found to say that it's not true. I don't know. And then when I was around 14 or 15, we got a call to my house. And I remember where I was standing when this happened. It was sorry, a woman from our church. And she was a missionary from South Africa. And she had called and asked to speak with me. And I remember my dad coming into the room with the phone and saying, this woman from church wants to talk to you. And she was in her 20s, so she was
Yeah.
actually young. Um, so I'm like, okay. I answered the phone and she said, I know this is really strange and I don't know how to explain this to you. But every single time I've gone to pray for weeks now, all I see is you. And she said, I don't know what it means, but can we spend some time together? And of course, no one, not my parents, no one knowing what I was going through.
Yeah.
I still get emotional when I think about this because I was so lonely and so in so much pain.
Mm.
And it was the first time that I realized like God sees me. He knows that I exist. Like he's heard me crying
Mm-hmm.
out to him.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started hanging out with, she just brought me into this little like community of young people from YWAM.
Mm-hmm.
So she was from YWAM. And it was this little group of misfits, I swear, like from all over. And a lot of people mixed in were doing School of the Bible. So there was just this really beautiful group of people that just loved on me where I was. And I went to on and during the summer to like one of their like, I don't know if it was like a month long thing. And then you go to Mexico for like outreach.
Mm-hmm.
And before you go, it's like they're doing all the teachings and, seeing where all the kids are and spiritual development stuff. And
Yeah.
I just felt like I'm waiting for something to happen,
Yeah.
when's this thing gonna happen? And like, when am I gonna be saved? Like I didn't, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I had this
Yeah.
idea. And there was one night where they were really like leaning into the cross, like they were going into gory detail and all these kids. I just remember I'm in the back of the room and all these kids are like crying and wailing and like having this big emotional experience. And I just remember thinking, wow, okay, like I must be really bad. um and I had this idea that you could be beyond saving, like you've sinned beyond repentance. Like I don't even know where I learned that verse, but I had it in my head.
Mm-hmm.
Probably when I was doing all that research for Calvinism.
That's right.
And so I had this idea in my head that I'm that bad and nothing's gonna happen for me. And like
Mm.
um I was devastated. And that night I went and I got in my cabin. I got in my bed and I put the covers over my head. I got on my face and
Mm.
I cried out to God that either save me or let me go because I
Mm.
can't live the rest of my life like this. And if you're not going to save me, then yeah, I just don't want to do it.
Mm.
And I had already kind of had an idea of like when I thought I was going to give like a timeline. It's like something needs to happen, or I did want to, I don't even
Yeah.
want to say it,
Yeah.
but and I don't know how to describe it, but since Martin Shaw could talk about it and be weird about it, I will be too.
Good.
Because what I experienced in that moment was nothing I've hardly ever experienced since. And
Mm-hmm.
that's like almost like it wasn't a voice, but it was like, it was not my own knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
something just divinely downloading into my mind. And it was, okay, it was like, okay, you want to do this? Well, that's not what it is. That emotion stuff is not what it is. This is, and clear as day, this is a marriage. This is a covenant. This is something that we're faithful to, even when those emotions aren't there.
Mm.
And then also immediately it was like, and you need to confess. And I was
Mm.
like, and it was, everything was right there, like everything that I needed to confess. And it was, you bring
Mm.
everything that you're hiding in the darkness into the light.
Mm.
And so all of that self-loathing, even about the self-mutilating, which I was humiliated even that I had that problem.
Mm-hmm.
The anger and the rage I had toward authority, like toward my mom,
Mm-hmm.
especially at that time, um, that I needed to confess it in front of all these people that I'd only met a few weeks before. And so I
Mm.
did. And I was shaking. I mean, I had such bad social
So this
anxiety.
wasn't just confessing under the covers. This was confessing to people.
No, very explicitly, like I was being told to take this from the darkness into the light, and that this
Okay.
involved me standing in front of people and speaking it out.
Mm.
And I was so terrified, but I was also so desperate that
Yeah.
it seemed like the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And I did. And I feel really lucky because there were some very mature, older
Mm-hmm.
um, leaders around.
Mm-hmm.
And I stood up and I, especially saying out loud, like the stuff from my childhood and like that
Yeah.
abuse, which I was humiliated by.
Yeah.
And it's like, as soon as I finished, I erupted in prayer. I had probably never prayed in front of people in my life either.
Mm.
And I felt literally a physical weight come off of my body.
Mm.
And they immediately surrounded me, and they, like, all
Mm-hmm.
these leaders, and they prayed
Mm-hmm.
with me. Um, and I can tell you from that time on, it was like a switch happened in me. I was a completely different person.
Mm-hmm.
I I suddenly could understand the Bible for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
All I wanted to do was understand or know God.
Mm-hmm.
Every book off of my dad's shelf, I just started picking up and reading. And I mean, even at one point, I was 16 years old, carrying around Charles Finney's systematic theology, and like this high schooler carrying, I'm like, what was I doing? But my biggest thing was like, I knew I experientially had something had happened,
Mm-hmm.
but I couldn't understand what it was.
Mm-hmm.
So I was reading about like atonement and um, sanctification, and it wasn't too long after that that it's like, yeah, the actual problems of the faith come up that you need answers for.
Yep.
Um, so at this point, I'm in high school. I've had a horrible time all through school, socially and everything. I was eating lunch in the bathrooms, and I didn't connect this until recently too, just how providential this was. But another person called and offered me a spot at this private school because I was a musician, and they were trying to build up their music program. And it was a school we never would have been able to afford or anything. But I went from being like lost in the sea of children at this massive public school to being very seen and exposed, and having like all my papers, which I thought I was a great student, made really great grades without trying. And then suddenly people are like scrutinizing my work. Turns out I couldn't write my papers off of Spark Notes anymore. But the quality of the education at the new place was
Yeah.
like, this was what leveled me up, and to a degree, is that the stuff they were reading was Tolstoy
Yeah.
and Augustine,
Yeah.
Dostoevsky.
Yeah.
These three particular blew my mind. When I read Crime and Punishment, I felt like I was understanding myself. I was like, his
Mm.
insight into the human psyche is just
Yeah.
amazing. And then older friend was like, well, if you like that, you'd like Kierkegaard. And again, I don't even know hardly what I'm reading, but this is the
Right.
kind of stuff that I was like, I was just insatiable. I was an avid reader and could not get enough. It's all I wanted to talk about. It's all I wanted to do with, Um, and even though all my peers were going to college, I felt like absolutely could not, because all I wanted to know was truth. And I didn't really even know what that meant. I realized that the culture around me, I felt like I needed to figure out who I was and who God was outside of my culture, my identity, and all that stuff. And I picked what I thought was the furthest away from that. Was like, I'm going to go to the motherland. I'm going to go to Africa. So I joined YWAM and went to Africa, and I did their discipleship training school
Mm-hmm.
in South Africa and Mozambique, and that was wild. But that experience for me was so humbling, because I had gone, where I was very well spoken. I, could talk theology. I could do all of these things. But when rubber hit the road and I'm here, I've never witnessed that level of despair and poverty in my life.
Yeah.
Um, and I had no context in my understanding of God, my view of God, and my understanding of the gospel. I had no context for that, because
Yeah.
I had this like Western idea, like you're going to do all these great things for God, and
Yeah.
it's self-aggrandizing.
Yeah.
But we were going to these townships where pretty much everyone had AIDS. They're living in like cardboard houses. I remember this one home, this one particularly wrecked me, because we go into this home and there are so many orphan children because all the parents had died of AIDS. And there's this man, we're bringing groceries to him and we're going to pray for him. He's writhing on the ground in pain on a dirt floor. And the only thing I'm thinking is he doesn't even have a TV to watch. He doesn't have medicine. He doesn't have anything to take his mind off of his
Yeah.
pain.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what the hell am I doing here? Telling
Yeah.
him about what is the gospel to a man that's dying like this?
Yeah.
And what kind of prayer am I going to pray
Yeah.
that means anything?
Yeah.
And I think there was like 3 days I could hardly get out of bed after that.
Yeah.
I nearly went home after that experience, because I just thought, I am just a stupid kid
Mhm.
and I have no answers. I can't even fix my own problems. What
Yeah.
am I doing? Um, so I had been kind of estranged from my brother at this time, but we started connecting over email.
Mhm.
I guess he was like, "What's my sister doing in Africa? Maybe she's interesting." So we started talking.
How age difference between you and your brother?
3 years.
Okay.
Yeah. Brilliant, brilliant guy. Um, it's funny, you were talking to somebody recently about like no, yeah, you encouraged one guy in Orlando to go to Germany to study. It's one of the things that my brother did too. Um, anyway, and he was like, well, if you don't have anywhere to go after Africa, you're welcome to come to Austin. And he was going to try and help me get a job at the hospital. I didn't know what else to do with my life, to be honest. And so I come to Austin. It turns out my brother was in the middle of like I had no idea what I was walking into. Um, I don't want to tell
Right.
his story
No, that's
but
fine.
very bad situation. And then I understood maybe why he was reaching out for me to
Yep.
come.
Yep. Yep.
He wanted something to happen.
Yep.
Anyway, he ended up having this major life flipping around like
Mm.
conversion too. So then we were just like, and then we had met another friend, and it just sort of like grew this sort of community,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. So I'm out looking for work because I have to pay. I was sleeping on a tile floor in Austin. Had like maybe 3 sets of clothes to wear. I didn't really need anything. And I didn't have a car, didn't have anything. And I'm walking around just picking up applications anywhere nearby to pay rent. And I was at this little local coffee shop, and there was a guy that overheard me that I'm looking for a job. Ultimately ends up being my husband. And he's like, I could use some help if you need some work. And this sort of, it's so funny because I was so backward and shy. Um, and there's a big age difference too. So he's like 15 years older than me. Um, anyway, I go over there and I see that he had a sandwich shop. And I went home and I was like, there's just no way that all my friends went off to college and are doing all these great things. There's no way I'm going to tell people that I'm working at a sandwich shop. Like, what a failure. And as soon as I said that, I felt this massive conviction of like, who do you think you are? Just came, you just came from Africa where you saw people in absolute abject poverty and you think you're too good to work at a, and I was like, okay, I'm taking this job. Because I felt like clearly my ego needs to die. And so yeah, so I I went over there and it's like one of those things almost immediately we my husband was a heavy smoker. He's like and he can't stand for anyone to be working if he's not working. So every time he had a smoke break, he'd like make everyone go outside and sit with him. So annoying. But we started talking and it was like immediately like you feel like you've known someone forever and you can't
Mhm.
stop talking.
Yeah.
It was like that. Completely platonic. In fact, we never dated. Like that's for later, but we never dated. But we were just I was crazy about him. He's so intelligent. And he was very interested in me. Like when he found out that I had been a missionary, he's like, I've never met an actual Christian. Like he knows nominal Christians, or he knows people who, it's like a religious sect, or it's a.
Hmm.
And so the level of conversations we were having, he was very interested in, and man, we spent hours and hours and hours and hours just like talking, and we ended up becoming just incredibly close friends. And um, a lot of stuff happened around that time. Like uh, my mom was diagnosed with cancer, so I had to go back home. And just this whole time, by the way, spiritually, I'm just like, I have no idea what's happening with my life. I'm just going from day to day,
You're not going to church?
No, at this point, I was not.
Mhm.
I was still devouring literature. I mean, um, I got really into like Watchman Nee. I was trying to solve the problem of why Christian lives didn't look like I thought they should. Where was the
Mhm.
power? Where was the
Yeah.
overcoming of
Yeah.
sin? I'm looking around at the church. I had gotten involved in a church here in Austin. I was even on the leadership, and it was just so hard for me. Like I am the kind of person who like you walk into a church and they have like a list of this is what we believe,
Yeah.
and I'm like I can't tell you I believe all that stuff. Like what the hell do I know? And one of them was even about the um what's it called, the whether or not the Bible is like completely inaccurate or
Oh,
inaccurate.
inerrancy or infallibility.
That one drove me really crazy, and I thought I was actually going to get kicked out of the church because I was like, well, what do you mean by inerrant? Like what does that even mean? And
Yeah.
um I don't know. I just didn't feel like I belonged in church circles, and every community group I was in, it's like they're sitting around watching The Bachelor. Like that was their idea of fellowship. Here I am, somebody who doesn't watch TV, doesn't watch movies. I don't drink, I don't smoke. I do all the disciplines. I'm like somebody who's fasting and praying, and I wake up at 5 o'clock every morning to read, pray, and then the thing is, I was, even though I knew intellectually that it's not my own righteousness, I was definitely living, I definitely believed that it would.
Yeah.
I was that eager kid in the classroom who wants to impress their teacher. I wanted God to
Mm.
call on me, and I wanted to be worthy of him calling on me.
Mhm.
And now I look back and I realize how much of that was just unhealed trauma stuff,
Mm.
and also
Mhm.
just probably an attachment disorder for my caregivers and stuff like that,
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
I totally put on God.
Mhm.
That as soon as feelings would wane, I would
Mhm.
feel like I was abandoned or rejected.
Mhm.
It was because I wasn't good enough and I wasn't trying hard enough. And it's because of
Mhm.
some secret sin that I haven't managed yet. So I was obsessively trying to like play whack-a-mole with every sin in my life. If I thought the tone of my voice when I talked to someone was too arrogant or something, I mean, it would devour me. I couldn't sleep at night. It was that bad. Um, long story short, let's see, I my brother ended up having a breakdown. He has some issues that have now been resolved. Again, I don't want to like
Right.
stuff that was undiagnosed that we weren't aware of, and
Right.
but it just shattered my world because suddenly I was completely alone. I
Mm.
was so I skipped the part about my husband and I getting him asking me to marry him. It was one of those like we hadn't dated or anything. He was just like, "What do you think about us getting married?" And I was like, "Okay." Um, and I think, well, this is what I think happened is that to me, he is someone of like when I say integrity, I mean like integral. Like he is so like the unity of character.
Hmm.
What you see is what you get.
Hmm.
So safe. He's deep. He's and I just felt like I felt so lost
Hmm.
and so fragmented
Hmm.
that I just wanted to cling to somebody that was whole and that
Hmm.
seemed to know what they were where they were going.
Hmm.
And I think I mean, I know I made the right choice, but I know that that was kind of my instinct
Yep.
was I'm not going to find anybody better than you and I think you're the only person that can tolerate my craziness. Um anyway, so we had decided to get married and but his dad died and yeah, so all this stuff was going on around me and I just remember waking up one morning, like I always did, like 5 o'clock to go read and pray. And it was uh like the ceiling was just steel. Like the heavens closed up.
Hmm.
The words coming out of my mouth felt like lead, like they just
Hmm.
like nothing. And I got up and I just said, I'm not doing this anymore.
Hmm.
I'm done. And it wasn't like um I didn't necessarily feel like I don't know. I still get emotional thinking about it because it was like it was so heartbreaking for me because
Hmm.
all of my identity, my entire life was that was it. All
Hmm.
my eggs were in that basket. I had
Yep.
no backup plan. I
Yep.
never had even imagined myself as a different kind of person.
Yep.
Um, but I felt like I just wasn't going to be able to make the cut and that I wasn't good enough and that ultimately God had rejected me or something. I don't know. I couldn't even think about it. I couldn't open my Bible again. Um, and then I just kind of went into this a dark night of the soul that lasted a really, really long time.
Hmm.
And yeah, so we got married, we had kids, and during this time, even though I say like it was a dark night of the soul, there were I think my last journal entry actually said I've believed in the gospel of my right arm and my right arm has failed me. And
Wow.
I would be driving down the road and unprovoked or whatever, this sense would come over me. And I would have like this visual in my mind of like being held by something that I wasn't holding on to. And it was almost like, hey, you let go, but I didn't let go.
Hmm.
So Calvinism is going to come back and bite me later on, because I'm going to ultimately believe in the sovereignty of God. because because at a certain point I don't have a choice anymore because like
Yeah.
I know absolutely that none of this is dependent on me and my
Yeah.
righteousness like I thought it would.
Yeah.
Um, and this verse kept coming up, and I know it's like whatever, it's out of context and whatever, but it is the verse that always came up to me. It was in Isaiah 6:13, where it talks about like
Hmm.
even when everything is laid waste, but the seed, the imperishable seed, is in the stump.
Yeah.
And I didn't know exactly what it meant, but I knew what it meant.
Hmm.
That everything was going to be torn down, and like I was going through a crucible, but that imperishable seed was untouchable, and I couldn't destroy it. And so yeah, I just felt like a seed buried under snow for the next long time until let's see, um, getting into my 30s and stuff.
Wow, you did a lot in 30 years.
Yeah, well, it gets worse. I'm just kidding. So I had kids, but I was really a terrible stay-at-home mom. Felt the only thing that kept me going actually is podcasts because I was so
Yeah.
unstimulated.
Yeah.
Um,
Taking care of little kids, yeah, it can be mind numbing. And so, of course, I mean, especially before podcasts and things, there's a reason certain moms look the way they did,
oh my
because
gosh. I
it's
could
not
not,
easy.
even hanging out with mom groups.
Yeah.
My husband, I remember, would be like, you get to sit home and like have coffee with friends. And I'm like, friends? They talk about strollers and car seats and diapers. I'm like, I'm not having fun here. But it's like funny. Recently, I read this little book by, I can't remember his name, Heiser. I don't know what his name. Ronald. Anyway, it's called Domestic Monastery.
Hmm.
And it kind of gave me a little different perspective on the seasons of our lives, like where we think we're not doing spiritual work, but our ego
Yeah.
has clearly gone to die. And I feel like motherhood's kind of where my ego's gone to die. Like you're constantly disrupted. You're not able to make something of yourself. You're never able to achieve something that feels successful to me anyway, especially as an ADHD mom. My house was always a mess. Everything's chaos. I just felt like, wow, I suck at everything. But when my first was 4 months old, we had a restaurant. A manager called in sick, and I, at 4 month old, 6 o'clock in the morning, I get up and I take my baby with me to work, and I'm like breastfeeding while I'm taking orders. I was like giving him naps 3 times a day in the restaurant. You're just doing whatever you have to do. And I wanted a way out, but I didn't know how to get out. I was like, I mean, yeah. So by the time I'm getting to 30, I'm having a midlife crisis of, I can see my future, and my husband's always going to be working 7 days a week. And I'm stuck doing this, working and dealing with the kids and failing at everything. And so I started getting into like a really serious depression. And I also had developed an autoimmune disease, and so I had like gotten into like nutrition, trying to reverse it. And then finally, after like years, like I felt a little bit better, but I read this book called The Last Best Cure, and she starts talking about EMDR and the mind body connection. And it was a science journalist who had interviewed all of the top researchers around it, and seeing this connection between um, adverse childhood events like your ACE score and the likelihood of you getting certain disorders. And it can predict it with uncanny accuracy, right? And I just thought, whatever, I'll give it a chance. But I've done therapy. I'm so tired of talking about like my childhood. I don't want to deal with any of this stuff anymore. And but I was like, I'll try it. I did an EMDR section. Have you ever heard of
Oh
EMDR?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Holy shit.
It's weird stuff. I mean, you'd think, what? How's that going to do anything? But actually, we have
Right?
a retired marriage and family therapist in the church, and she wound up, that was the bread and butter of her practice for a long time.
I mean, I thought it was woo woo stuff,
Yeah,
but it turns out that all these ancient practices that were connecting mind and body, like
yeah,
we thought we are like too freaking smart.
yeah,
They knew what they were doing.
yeah.
And even what built up to this, I'd started doing yoga, and I just felt like this body work and all the stuff that I was doing had, because this comes up later. That's the only reason I'm really mentioning it is because had become sort of limber, like all the things. And one of my videos, I talk about how like ossified my heart had become toward, like I was fully inoculated. I've been there, done that. Like I did all the way, you know what I mean?
Yep.
Um, and so I thought I was completely inoculated against really the gospel or Jesus ever
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
But I knew something really profound had happened to me, but I didn't know what to do with it. So I just couldn't look at it anymore.
Yeah.
So anyway, all these things had sort of limbered me up. And going into EMDR, I had this profound realization, because you don't even really do a lot of talking, and it's like a magic wand. It's crazy.
Yeah. It's pretty crazy.
I had this explosion of, like, first of all, I for the first time understood that how insanely lonely I was as a child, and
Mm,
how that loneliness and this insecure attachment that I had, that I started connecting all these dots in all
right.
of my relationships. I started seeing this,
Right.
like my fear of rejection is not just like a normal fear of
Right.
rejection. It destroys me.
Yep.
And yeah, and in the session, I was able to basically communicate with my younger me and kind of heal that memory. I was able to
Mm.
insert,
Yeah.
it's like cleaning a wound, you know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? I was able to clean out, debride that wound,
Mm-hmm.
and let it properly heal over.
Mm-hmm.
And then so that was the beginning. And then I'm about to turn 33 and I'm thinking, man, things are getting better. My depression's gone, like and then my husband has a heart attack and ends up having a quadruple bypass. And here I am now having like, we've got multiple businesses. My youngest was like 2 years old. And once
Oh.
again, just feeling like I'm back into crisis mode, like seems to be the story of my life. Um, and that was around the time too that we had a friend visiting from, anyways, actually the son of my dad's best friend from the ministry, who ended up becoming a hardcore atheist, like talk about Dawkins, Hitchens, those guys.
Yeah.
So he's self-educated,
Yeah.
worked with NASA. He was the superintendent of the observatory at a major university. Brilliant, guy. They
Yeah.
passed over PhDs to put this guy. Like, so he's
Yep.
brilliant and he's a brilliant atheist. Like,
Yep.
so his son though became interested in my dad and our family and started bringing his family to come visit on the summers. And so he was sort
Hmm.
of softening and his, opening up, and I was still closed off. And we're having this conversation, and he brings up, "Have you ever heard of Jordan Peterson?"
Oh gosh.
This is like 2016.
Uh-huh.
And I said, "No." And he was like, I remember the look on his face. He looks at me, he's like, "I think you'd really like this guy." So he sends me the link to his first interview on Joe Rogan. And I mean, I'm listening to this interview, couldn't care less about that bill he was talking about, really. It was all these other things that he talked about.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was like there was like this quickening,
Yeah.
like something just like lurched in my spirit.
Yeah.
And I didn't really know what it was, but I knew I wanted more.
Yeah.
And I joke about it, but if he says he has 200 hours of videos on YouTube, I watch 200 hours of videos on YouTube. We get to the biblical series. Oh my gosh. Like, so we get to Genesis. I wept. I wept through the entire thing right alongside Jordan. In fact, I think I might be the only person who cries as much as Jordan Peterson. Um, and I just started. So my brother and I, and my dad, even like, my dad's really good at staying connected and always been able to talk to us, even though we were
Yeah.
post-Christian.
Yeah. Yeah.
But my brother and I were like listening to Sam Harris, Eric Weinstein,
Yeah. Yeah.
Daniel
Yeah.
Schwarzenberger. Like,
Yeah.
we were really into all this stuff
Yeah.
um, for years. And so then you hear Jordan and Sam debating, and it was like, I really like Jordan, I really like Sam, but now we're hearing these ideas
Yeah. On stage
confronted.
with each other. Yeah.
And it was like that inner battle that we were having too, being right there on stage. And it was like, who's going to win, and which side are we going to be, whatever. um Jordan won out clearly, but there was definitely, think that Jordan played this role in turning over the soil of my heart to such a degree that I was ripe for something to happen. I started seeing the Bible from a different way. And the fact that he uses different language, and the same, this is how I feel with Vervaeke and you, and now it's like John Mark Comer, for example. I actually feel the same way about him, able to use language in a different way that does not just, these barriers don't fly up to where you can actually hear it in something in a new way. So let's say fast forward now, during COVID, all this stuff is happening, and you feel things happening with people. They start having deeper conversations about things, the meaning crisis. And then my parents get COVID, and they get over COVID, but my dad apparently had a secondary infection. He had pneumonia, and they were hospitalized. And during that time, you can't like communicate with them,
Right.
whatever.
Right.
We had no idea that my dad was dying.
Oh. Oh no.
And my dad, I mean, like, was my absolute best friend. He
Oh.
every morning, it's like whatever podcast I'm listening to, like, could not wait to talk to my dad about it. And so, um, And then like, so my last conversation with him, I should have known that he knew that he was, because he was in and out of like coherency. He ended up dying of sepsis because they didn't treat, because of all the weird stuff, and never,
Right.
COVID patient. He was treated like a
Right.
COVID patient. I don't know.
Right.
They put him on remdesivir, which probably complicated it too. Anyway, um, we had this conversation, and he just was like regaling his whole life. He told me his whole life story from the beginning to the end, and I was just gripped. Um, and I kind of had this sense of like, it was, and then later I found out that like the night before, he called my brother and they talked until like 2 o'clock in the morning. My dad just was like, Jed, listen, I need you to listen to me. And he told my brother the gospel, and he just said,
Mm.
listen, he said, like basically, no matter, I don't even know how he worded it. My brother would be better, but um, he said, you just can't get away from Jesus.
Yeah.
And then, yeah. So yeah, my dad passed away. It was very traumatic for our family. My mom and dad were like inseparable, like madly in love
Mm.
to like to a disgusting point. Oh, like they just were mad about each other. It
Mm.
was really bad. But so at his memorial, oh, and I didn't tell you this part, but because this is important. For like 8 years, my dad had been trying to convince me to go to North Point.
Mm.
And
That's a church.
yes, his selling point on this was, you can come as you are. It doesn't matter where you are in your faith or whatever, or
Right.
lack of. Like, we've got atheists there, we've got agnostics, we've got
Right.
seekers, we've got all kinds of people. You will be welcomed. And he just said, I just wish you could get involved with the music.
Mm.
Because in my youth, I was a worship leader for years. And so I went with him like once to, and first of all, I had like such an allergic reaction to church at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, it hurt. It was physically painful to be in a church. And then I'm looking at the music, and you're in Austin, Texas. I mean, the singers are like from The Voice and American Idol. And
Mm.
these are like, they have albums. All these people have out, they're professionals. And I'm like,
Mm.
Dad, I've barely played guitar or sung in 15 years. Like, it's never going to
Mm.
happen. But for 8 years, he was on me about that.
Mm.
So at his memorial, my dad was a songwriter, and I sang a few of his songs.
Mm-hmm.
And when like the worship, the music director at the church was
Yeah.
there. And weeks later, I get a call inviting me to come hang out in his studio. And
Mm-hmm.
of course, I'm thinking he's being nice because my dad worked on the soundboard, and he's
Yeah.
just trying to like reach out and be nice or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
And I go in thinking I'm in there for a rehearsal, and then we just talk. And it
Mm-hmm.
was so awkward. I don't even know. I probably said such, and I don't even know. It was so awkward. And I was in such the throes of grief.
Yeah.
I think I said so many F words because I'm like not trying to, like, it was not even trying to like, um, and they were both like really introverted and like, anyway. And then like I leave and I get in the car and I'm like, the fuck was that? Why did I just come here and have this conversation with these people? And then they invited me back again. And this time they're like, let's sing a song. And I froze. I was like, yeah, I can't do this. And I don't know why I'm doing this. Like, I don't want to, why are we singing? And it was so bad, Paul. Like, I still, like, my stomach hurts when I think of it. I'm so embarrassed.
Yeah.
But I'm about to leave. And he stops, this guy, the music director. He stops and he's like, Emily, do you ever, do you think that things happen for a reason? And I look at him and I'm like all cynical. And I was like, well, it depends on what you mean by that, I guess. And he said, well, I don't know how to explain it, but you just keep coming up. And it's like, as soon as these words come out of his mouth, I'm immediately taken back to like 14-year-old me.
Right.
And I felt so apprehended by God in that moment. And it had nothing to do with, because he was inviting me to do music with him.
Right.
He just said, I feel like we're supposed to do music together.
Yeah.
He had no idea that my dad had been telling me this for 8 years.
Yeah.
he didn't know any of the stuff that really was going on with me.
Yeah.
And I just remember freezing in that moment. It was like God just grabbed a hold of me, and it was like, the time in the wilderness, whatever that is, it's over. We've got work, we've got stuff to do. Let's go, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and it was not, I mean, that was wild because no one in my life knew me ever as a Christian. So I had to sit down with each one of my friends because they were like, "Why are you going to church?" And I was like,
Well, you're not just
um,
going to church. You're
"Oh
up
no,
on stage at a really big church.
yes, yes." And also, it's like there was all this stuff happening inside of me. So especially my closest friends, I had like these sit down conversations, and I'm expecting them to be like,
Yeah.
"You've lost your mind." Instead, they're like, "Can I go with you?"
Mm,
And suddenly, I have all these people in my life that are interested in God and Jesus, and like they've
yeah.
never really heard the gospel. And so all
Yeah.
this stuff and then my brother ends up having this like massive turnaround again too. I'm telling you, like, if you asked me if my brother, I never called myself an atheist. He would have considered himself like that.
Yeah.
Um, so for him to, I mean, it's wild. That's why I say I now believe in the sovereignty of God, because when I was not going after him, uh, yeah, completely changed my life back around. And this, like, the last part of this really is that um, doing the music, it was like such a trigger for me. And, I don't know if you ever heard of IFS, internal family systems.
Yeah.
It's a form of therapy too.
Yeah.
Also,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like where you kind of deal with the parts of yourself. Like you are like a community of parts.
Yeah.
And that each one of these parts is there for a reason, to like protect you or whatever. But he has this language where he talks about, like, it's not, he doesn't use the word trigger, he uses the words trailhead.
Hmm.
And I said I couldn't sleep. I was just wrought with anxiety. Like, what the heck am I doing? I am not good enough. I was embarrassed. I felt like I sucked so bad, and I just didn't want to do it.
Now,
I wanted out.
with this, are you playing music that they're picking for you, or do you have a degree of leeway over
No,
you're picking?
none, none. And I still, and like, no,
No,
I
no,
show up,
which none? I don't understand.
they assign me
Oh,
music.
okay, okay, okay.
Um,
So you're
and
a performer in that sense rather than a leader.
yes, yes, and
Okay.
it's so
That's an
different.
important distinction in a
It
context like
absolutely,
this.
absolutely, and it's also part of my current ongoing crisis that I'm
Okay.
working through,
Okay.
is what it means to be part of a church in this context.
Mm,
It, often, we talk about authenticity, like,
yeah.
uh, me managing that is sacred to me.
Yeah.
That is like, that's something I just will not, I cannot, uh, I cannot stand up there and perform. I can't. So when in my younger years, like through YWAM and these things, I was definitely a worship leader. I have a catalog of songs that I know, and we will be in these hours long prayer and
Yeah.
talking, sharing kind of situations. And I would be like, dude, like being led by the Holy Spirit, like
Yeah.
songs would come up.
Yep. Yep.
And you really depend on a sort of, I hate to use like the religious language, but you really depend on a certain anointing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so now getting feedback about my stage presence, or
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's a real struggle. So there was all that going on, and anyway, I just felt like I was having a nervous breakdown,
Yeah.
and I was like, I don't know what's going on. I tried to get into emergency therapy because I thought I was actually losing my mind. There was one night that my husband held, I was crying hysterically for hours, and he held me just praying for me for like 2 hours straight,
Mm,
because I thought I was having a nervous breakdown, because it's all mingled in with the grief. And
yeah.
like, you're in this emotionally very, everything is just so turned over, and all of these things that I've worked my whole life to not have to face are now like I'm facing them. So
Why
talk
did
about like
you
a
agree to do this?
why?
Yes.
I don't know. Well, first of all, it's like in that moment, it was
Is
well,
your
felt like
father?
it. Well, it's partly, and it's also, um I've always said that during worship, or like what I was a part of doing, like when I was younger, or music in general. So
Yeah.
like even so when I left, like that, like I don't know, what do you say, left the faith? How do you say that?
I don't know.
I don't know. When I was in the
Because
wilderness,
it's really hard to figure out how to say a
none
lot
of
of
those
in
words
terms of
feel
yeah.
none of those words or phrases feel right. They feel really trite and empty, and I don't know what to say. But whenever I left all that stuff, I lost music too. It
That's
was
interesting.
like my enjoyment in music was so much in the actual worship, and the
Yep.
whether it's religious music or not, there was
Right.
something. My dad described it as like he felt the delight of God on him when he would sing. He led worship too, and that's exactly how it felt. Like there is something that happens inside of me that feels like the warmth of God is all around me, and I don't know how else to describe it.
Yep.
um and so that's what I was, saying yes to. And it felt like it was designed for me to just like a door just opened for me to just walk right into, and it has been great. But I think part of what happened is it was used to really, there was so much healing that needed to be done still.
Mm,
And so, like I said, like this trailhead analogy worked very well for me, because I felt like I was having these panic attacks, which I've never had in my life. I had to pull over on the side of the road. I thought I was having a heart attack. Um, Crying all day long, like couldn't figure out what's going on. Anyway, and so this idea of the trailhead was like, okay, there's something there, and if you decide to go down that trail, yes, it's like it feels like it's going to destroy you, because that's what I was afraid of, but it's also the source of the deep, profound healing that you're longing for.
yeah.
And I just had this, there was this one moment I had been reading like Gabor Mate and
Yeah.
all these things. And there was one page on there that just struck me one day. I'm sitting on my couch reading, and it just hit me all of a sudden that I have never known the unconditional love of God. And see, I still get emotional. Sorry, I told you I cry more than Jordan Peterson. Um, and I just realized that every person needs to have that as a child. They need to know there's nothing you can do
Mm-hmm.
to be loved more or to be loved less.
Mm,
And from such an early age, I had experienced such a massive amount of shame and guilt and sense of unworthiness and
mm-hmm.
unlovableness, whatever,
Yeah.
um, that I couldn't shake the rest of all those decades. And I was always trying to justify my existence by being good enough, or winsome enough, or agreeable enough, or likable enough.
Mm,
And like as I'm reading that page, I've had this profound sense of the deep love of God that I'd never known before. And that sense of like, this time you're not a little girl that's alone and neglected, but you have a community around you. And this time, like, I'm going with you, and that's where the healing is going to come from.
mhm.
And yeah, I've had like three maybe experiences in my life, but the initial one when I was like 16, EMDR, and then that one that was so yeah, life changing. And yeah, so that's kind of where I am now, and I've just been trying to sort out my relationship to
Well, that's
church.
where you are now. So you didn't talk about getting off the stage at North Point, because I mean, that's a moment too, because you got kicked off or you quit.
Oh, North Point.
Yeah.
Oh no, I did not get. In fact, it's kind of interesting because like I went in the beginning, I'm sort of just, I would be coming like once every 3 months sometimes, like just
Okay.
sporadically. And every single time I think, okay, I suck, and I'm for sure that's the last time I'm doing this. And I wanted to be fired. Like, and then what happened was all of the main group
Yeah.
left. altogether. And then guess what? I'm like the only person left. So it was
All the
me.
worship leaders left?
Yeah. Yeah. It's I don't want to like
No, that's okay. You
tell
don't have to
church
go into
church
details because
stuff. Yeah.
those things wreck
So,
videos. Trust me. Or at least they wreck they make great videos, but you can't put them on YouTube. So
no, I mean, and it was nothing like there was nothing or
no,
nothing
right,
bad. There was nothing scandalous at all.
right,
It's just
right.
it's just church stuff, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
It's sometimes the combination between church stuff and people with artists' temperaments,
oh,
because
you nailed it. You
these
nailed it.
these mega churches become these massive institutions that are experience delivery machines, and they need artists to deliver the experience to people. But artists are these, there's authenticity. You have this level, there has to be congruence on the inside and the outside, and so
Oh, you
it's a
you nailed it, Paul,
yeah,
because so as soon as it happened, I went scrambling into fix it mode and I'm like I scheduled meetings with like the leadership of the church and I just was saying, listen, I know I'm an outsider. I know I'm just a random person that comes in and out on the stage, but I really think you guys should think about the fact that in the leadership, there's a tendency to want to control everything. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, you've got to be these type A people that it is like that thing is flawless. I mean, they have it.
oh yeah,
And it's so, but when you have all that structure, it gives you the space for, to relax into it.
yes,
Um, but then I just said, the thing that this guy did so well was he's dancing on that border between order and chaos. And when you try to control that, you're going to lose the magic because the magic is on that dance between order and chaos. And
yeah,
especially when it comes to things like those those spaces in the Sunday morning experience that are,
yep, yep.
I mean, because I hear it all the time. I have people come up to me all the time telling me that what's happening inside of them during the music, it's way more impactful than the message.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
And so I'm
yeah.
like, you can't discount that. And if
No,
you try to over manage
right,
that part, you're going to lose the magic,
right. Which
So,
makes oh gosh, there's a whole there's so much in that whole area in terms of mega churches, and really in many cases the the psychotechnology that energizes the megachurch movement is mass worship, as we call it, and it's
yeah.
so deeply tied to music. And then the relationship between that and this religious industrial complex that is trying to affect, I
Mhm.
mean, and you just said, it's the order chaos thing, and that's why I asked immediately, were you a performer? Because churches, and this then gets into the question of what exactly is a church? Is a church this community of Christ that is going to have all of this raggediness, which in which cases things in a church can get really raggedy,
Yeah.
which is, and then people who are coming in, because part of what Americans want from institutions is, again, this restraining of chaos, because individual people, so if you kind of take people in and you kind of govern them and you create an institution, you sort of try to stabilize that so you can deliver on expected outcomes. But the expected outcomes that you want the church to deliver on is not a, is a, is there's wildness built into that. And
Yeah.
if you wring the wildness out of it, it's dead. And now
Exactly
suddenly,
what I was about to say. It's, this goes back again to like things that Martin Shaw and what's the other guy? There's Martin Shaw and this other guy that have similar, they're very artsy.
Paul Kingsnorth.
Yes. The idea of like the rewilding,
Yeah,
and it's like we have, I think, overly,
yeah,
we have just overly, it's so neat. And the thing is like all the things that we need to happen don't happen in that neat space. And
yeah.
so I don't know. I don't know the answer for it. So
Well, there is no answer for
There
it
is no
because,
answer.
and I loved how Martin Shaw in that conversation basically says, we got to talk about this wild thing. And then he basically goes and says, you know, he blew up my life. He blew up my finances. He blew up my, you know, he blew up everything. And there is, and Lewis, you know, tries to get at this with Aslan is not a tame lion,
Right.
but it's also, and of course I'm preaching through the Gospel of Mark. I'm preaching in the Gospel of Mark right now, and that wildness in the Gospel of Mark is so tangible that, I mean, Jesus' mother and brothers come to him to try to, you know, okay,
You've lost it,
okay,
James.
Jesus, I think we've had quite enough of this, okay? And it's like, you have absolutely no idea how stranger this is going. And then, and the fact that, you know, Mary and James come around in the end is a testament to truth. But, you know, part of what's powerful about your story is that it is so wild. And that is a big theme in, it's just so hard to talk about because people are so diverse, and there are really wonderful, serious, genuine Christians who have deeply orderly faith and life. That is just true. And so you can't say, unless I see the wildness, it's not authentic and true. No, you can't say that. That's how wild it is.
Yeah.
That you can't just say, well, this is chaos. No, it's, you know,
Right.
anyway, I'm
I see.
sorry.
I mean,
I
same thing.
interrupted.
No, you didn't interrupt. I mean, this is so much of what I've wanted to talk to you about since I first ever saw your videos
Yeah.
too. Because the question that I have is like, I mean, and I don't think it's necessarily answerable. And also I will say one thing that I gravitated to your channel from is like you have such a lightness about you. Like it doesn't seem to ruffle you. Like things that to me, I don't want to say it's like I doubt or I feel like this urgency, like I need to figure this out. And you're able to laugh about it and just like you notice it, you observe it, and you're like, but it doesn't affect you. Whereas I become like, this is a problem and I need to understand it. I need to get my mind around it. And like you're okay not having your mind. So whenever I would listen to you, I could just feel my nervous system calming down, you know? Like
Mm.
I'll be so shaken by things that are happening in the world. And so my real question is like, what does it mean? And it's always been my question. What does it mean to be a believer, a follower of Jesus of Nazareth in this world? What does it mean to be the church? What is our function? What is our role? Like, and as you know, like all like current events in politics, and this has been a problem in my life for a long time because it's not the first time stuff like this happens. It's like all of these things sort of intersect, like the Christian nationalism
Yeah.
intersects on my practical life,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
Part of my husband, like he would never say he's a Christian. He would never, because he has this whole like anti being colonized,
Yeah.
and he's like, you know, I love that phrase because it's everything.
Yeah.
And he doesn't like if he thinks I'm trying to colonize him. I'm
Yeah.
trying to make him use
Yeah.
these exact words that I want him to say or
Yeah.
whatever. And he's like, I'm not going to do it because I know what happens when people, you know,
Yeah.
get too much into their groups.
Yeah.
But I think so like even at North Point, like there's been this massive growth, very sudden too. It's like there's so many people coming in. And so all my thing is like, well, what are we going to do with all these people?
Yeah.
We can't, like Sunday morning's not good enough. And so
Yeah.
enter in John Mark Comer. So I discovered John Mark Comer because we did like one of his books in my group, and I never buy those
Did
books.
you send me that video? A few people
Okay.
sent me that video.
So I sent you a video a long time ago of him talking about, he talks about the a community and the culture of outrage, and then he does community in a something. It's always like he uses the alliterations, but something political polarization.
Oh, okay.
And his take on it was just like, it's like looking for something that transcends it, you know, because
Yeah.
when you get into it, it's super muddy and it's like cotton wool. Like you just can't parse things out, and people just become so ideologically possessed. There's
Yeah.
no conversation.
Yeah.
And I feel like a real Christianity, a real following of the way should be able to transcend it.
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And it's hard because as soon as I try to have these conversations with people, it's like even if I'm so careful about what language and what words I use, it's just like you've activated their political system.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It's like one of these movies where there's a bomb that has to be, you're gonna have to you're gonna have to deactivate this bomb. And there's all these wires and it's like, is it the green wire or the red wire? But
Which
on
word
the
am I
chest they have
using?
this
That's
big
not.
clock.
Well,
What's
that's
that?
where I feel like I get that same sort of imagery around like Vervaeke because it's like, oh, he's got to write. He'll just invent words. We'll just invent words. I'll tell you what those words mean, and you just have to experience it to figure out what it means. And that's how we're gonna do this new world thing because I don't necessarily see a way around it. you know.
Yeah, there's no way around much of anything, actually. It's the AA aphorism. The only way past is through. I mean, that's the way it is in this world. And in many ways, that's the point of the cross. Uh,
Yeah.
and that's the point of Gethsemane, where Jesus is basically asking, is it really true the only way forward is through? And the answer is yes. And that's why you must die. And your point about, I mean, what is a Christian? I mean, I still hold to my definition. A Christian is someone who trusts Jesus more than they trust themselves. And it's it's really hard to trust Jesus. I mean, because trust Jesus, yada yada yada. But then it's trust Jesus with this.
Right.
And of course, again, the cross is at the center of it because I have to trust the Father. And a lot of it's so funny because once I was talking about the resurrection and people are like, and I say, well, we have this example that Jesus actually goes to death and comes out the other end, and people are like, yeah, but he knew he was going to be raised, and it's like, you know, what you're just not. That's in many ways you do have to sort of immerse yourself in the Jesus of the Gospels. And this Sunday I preached on one of my favorite stories with the
I
woman with
listen.
the
Yeah, it's one of my favorite. I listen to
yeah.
it. I listen to all your sermons,
Oh,
Paul.
well, thank you. So it's and I think part of the modern, well, it's not just modern. We This is an issue with church too. We tend to want we have all these different ways of trying to avoid trusting in Jesus. And that's the idol making thing. So we'll turn the church into an idol. And I think part of the reason the church is always messed up is that's part of the way that God helps us not make it an idol, if at all possible, even though we make all kinds of things into idols. Because how can you? I was just listening to the front end. I haven't got the whole thing yet, but Andrew Sullivan talking to Justin Brierley. Um, Andrew Sullivan had Justin Brierley on his podcast, and Andrew Sullivan was talking about the fact that it was his archbishop at the heart of the pedophile scandal. And it wasn't just him covering it up. It was, and there are a few things in life that are just as clearly evil
Yeah.
as molestation of children. And then to have this at the heart, you know, and so then Andrew Sullivan talks about the fact that he had to get over this
Mm.
in order to somehow stay in church. And to a certain degree, as clergy, as a minister, on one hand, the that there's a practical idolatry that you have with the church in that you want it to be, but you want it to be great, but it's so self-interested because you're so deeply a part of it. Then there's another part of it where, as clergy, you see how the sausage is made, And you really have to be careful with cynicism because, and I don't know much about John Mark Comer, but people have been sending me tidbits since I made that little video about him. And when I heard bits of it in that one interview, when he starts talking about small church, because that's right. In that, at least with a small church, I mean, people are always say, well, if I lived in Sacramento, I would come to Livingstone's. And I just laugh because Livingstone's is so raggedy. It's so almost dead. It's so uncool. And that's part of the reason I keep putting the Freddie and Paul show up, because it's like, if you can't stomach 20 minutes of the Freddie and Paul show, you're going to really struggle with an hour of Livingstone's. Because, but
it's amazing how many people do love the Freddie and Paul show.
Yeah, there's a few hundred people that watch that sucker every week. It's probably a bigger number than people dip in, but this is, I mean, so many. No, it's so many. Every idol has to die in your relationship with Jesus. It's just the way it is. And Jesus will, I mean, and your story nicely. So, this is it. And what this is in every case is something that I can trust in instead of Jesus. And he'll whack that down. So, and no, maybe if I do this, I don't really need to trust Jesus. Whack that down.
Well, that's what I feel like. I came to this point where I even knew, like, I knew that everything had to fall apart because it was built on the wrong foundation, and that it necessarily had to fail. Like, even all of my religious construct, like I had built up this, like, whatever, this profile of a really good Christian, but it was all built on the sinking sand. And so, like, I had that sense. And then also, it's funny because I've had so many experiences too of, like, someone I really looked up to, but then, like, and someone commented on the section. I never, like, went into it because I was like, it's too much to say in a YouTube comment thread. But, like, it's gotten to that point where I don't put you just don't put weight. You don't put weight on that. You know what I mean? Because you know that people are absolutely going to fail. They have to. And then I wanted to say something too about Jesus in Gethsemane and whether he knew, because this is something that's been playing in my mind a lot, was whether or not how much Jesus really knew, right?
Yeah.
And I had one day this thought that it seems to me, like, when I reread the Gospels through this lens, it's still held and it made sense, was that Jesus was what it would be like to be fully human and fully reliant on the Holy Spirit, right? Or by the Spirit of God to live. Because it almost felt like sometimes in his interactions, like he was, like, even at the Last Supper, you get this idea that he's like, one of you is going to betray me. Like, he got that sense in that moment. And, just like he had to demonstrate that for us.
Yeah.
What it meant to live and to face life.
Yeah.
And to face human suffering and to bear up your cross.
Yeah.
Even though, like, absolutely everything in all of your reason and all of your logic tells you that this is a complete fail. It's stupid. Look, nobody's with you. You're the only one doing this stupid, crazy thing. But kept going, and, like, all you have to do is read the book of Acts, and I that's wild. Like, the book of Acts, every time I read it, I'm like, I forgot about that part. Like, that's wild.
Yeah.
But you just see the kind of certainty that they had. And even Paul, like, but and Tim Keller, he'll talk about what it means to, like, commit your steps. And he's like, to commit your steps, meaning you put all of your weight on that step, believing that it's going to hold you up.
Yeah.
And like, that's,
But for everything, there's also there's a shadow idolatry to it. And you see that with the believism, where it's, okay, so if we're always looking for these substitutes. So if I really, really believe, and it's like, well, now you've just put your belief in believism. And it's always got to be in Jesus and in him alone. And what's so amazing about it, so we've got, of course, in this little corner, We've got of course, we've got Sam the Unitarian, and we've got Jacob the Jacob the very interesting. I don't even know how to describe Jacob's Judaism because it's just kind of weird. But you've the we imagine we can get into Jesus' head, and it's like, I don't even know my own head. And I'm going to somehow transcend 2,000 years and get into the head of the God man and and I think the reason that Orthodox Catholic Christianity, small Orthodox, small C Catholic Christianity arrives at, the Trinity and the doctrine of Christology is it just kind of put boundaries on there. And to say, once you make him not God, something of this falls apart. And once you make him not man, something of this falls apart. But if you think you can sort of, find the formula for this, now you've got another idolatry. And so it's the most basic level is trust. And that's where, of course, Gethsemane, if Jesus can be surprised, now whether or not, you just go round and round these things, but Jesus was surprised by this woman that sneaks up and pickpockets a miracle out of his cloak.
Mhm. That was another example of what I was saying. He seems genuinely surprised.
Yes, yes. So it's and then with the church too, you've just got to live with these uncertainties. And the only way to live with uncertainty is trust. And that sounds crazy because wait a minute, trust is the opposite of uncertainty. Yeah.
Well, I think trust, though, it acknowledges the uncertainty and it does it anyway,
Yeah. And that's so often.
Because I think the uncertainty is also part of the posture, the proper posture of man before God is like, what do we know? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just a kind of like I'm just a man or a woman in my case, I guess.
So you found Peterson, and then you found Peugeot, and then you found the corner, and now you're are you going to church anywhere now? Or are you just kind
No,
of
I'm still leading worship at North Point.
Are you really?
Yes.
Oh my.
And I mean, you know what? It's so interesting because I've always been so cynical about church, and something I just have grown so much love for these people. And I feel like it started out just like it's an obedience. I felt very strongly that I was supposed to just start going to church somewhere, start building community.
Yeah.
I joined a women's group, and I have I mean, it's a lot of older women. I absolutely love being around older women.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, they're hilarious.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm just sort of like,
they're done playing certain games.
yeah. Oh my gosh. And they're so different. And it's just, I just love it. We have all kinds of people at that church too, by the way. So that kind of keeps it fun.
Yeah. I
And
believe
even
it.
the leadership, it's like, they're probably going to see this too, I imagine, because I send out like PVK videos, like they're candy. I'll be like, have you seen this? Have you thought about this? Because they're always dealing with all the complexities, culture, what's going on in modernity. And because they have this huge flux of people coming in that are bringing in all these ideas, and they're trying to sort it out too.
Yeah.
So I'll share, with them stuff that anyway, so they're familiar with you. But no, I love them. First of all, they're genuine. They definitely care, and they do things in a different way. I don't know. I mean, but I think that they regret ever giving me their cell phone numbers. And I kind of joke. This is another thing. I'm going to say this, even though I know they might see this. It's like, they'll bring in in a lot of ways, like here in Austin, the way the music, like worship teams and stuff, it's like a lot of hired hands.
Yeah.
It'll be like gigs for some people.
Yeah.
And so like they'll bring someone in who's never sung at the church before, whatever. And that person, like, they speak between songs, and whatever.
Yeah.
They don't let me say a word. Never. Like, and it's so obvious. Like, anyone else will be given a speaking role except for me. And you can't help but wonder. And I don't want to ask because I think at a certain, like, maybe I just don't want to know. Like, I don't want to even know what the answer to it would be. I've let it go. It doesn't hurt my feelings. I mean, it's not like I'm anxious to talk to, whatever either. But you wonder, like,
Yeah, yeah.
because
It's
I'm
we
so
had so we had estuary yesterday, and someone brought in a situation where the week before he's talking about a situation at work where at last two estuary meetings we've been talking about public lies. Public lies are very interesting things. And so here at this work, one of the issues was right now this is going through the state of California because well, you live in Austin, so again, another state capital.
we're
So a lot
basically
of
we're basically California now.
yeah, so a
So
lot of
many
state
Californians
workers.
here.
So basically the word came on high that, everything's been, remote work, and now people are going to have to be coming into the office, blah, blah, blah. But they had sold off the state had gotten rid of, shut a whole bunch of office facilities
Yeah.
because of COVID. And we're not going to everyone, but anyway, so this went out, and in this particular department, a whole bunch of people knew there's nowhere near enough places in that building for all of us. And this isn't going to work. And then so this person was talking about, why does the organization lie like this? And then he comes back the next week and says, well, it was really amazing because they basically admitted that there's not enough room for this. And, and it was like this moment of fresh air where the organization kind of told the truth. And, somebody opened the windows. It was like, and then someone comes up with another thread and just, rips through, and then gotta lock it down again. And it's the difficulty is always, just like you say, you got to run this chaos and order thing. But when you're doing it as an institution, it's so much trickier. And so then you have these public lies, and that's why I'm so happy I am in a small church that no one, our things are little.
I know. Well, it's like, John Mark Comer, even because like I did the same thing with him like I did with everyone. If someone says something interesting, I want to hear like what they're about. And I take like a
Yeah,
large sample of what they have to say.
yeah.
And his whole, by the way, like this is what I would love for you to look into because this is what I'm looking at now. Is his new book is called Practicing the Way. That's his nonprofit organization. And it's like going back to the basics of just like apprenticeship to Jesus. And in one of those interviews with that same Carey guy, an old one, he said that he would never church plant again. And he said, I don't know what I would do. He goes, but the whole like the theater of church, I don't think is where it's at. And he said, I really think it needs to be people basically at a table together.
Yeah.
It needs to be people coming together, practicing the way together,
Yeah.
reinforcing, and like the whole thing of practicing the way is just creating the space in your life for God to be doing things. It's a resistance against the spirit of our time, against the world, the flesh, and the devil. It's putting up those boundaries and those resistances in your life that actually give you the space for actual life transformation. And doing that work together with other believers and helping each other along. Anyway, his work is really fascinating, but whenever he said this about what we do on Sunday morning is so much theater, I'm like, it absolutely is. Yeah. And it's really hard for me. When I was young, when I was a brand new believer, read the New Testament for the first time, I just was like, this looks nothing like what I expected this to look like. Yeah. And it's funny, I remember being in like middle school and they made the mistake of doing that financial presentation during Sunday service. Like, I don't know if you guys ever do that, where you give like the financial health of the church and what's our growth and what's our strategy.
They do it during the Sunday service?
Yes. And I was there, I was present. And of course, like the first thing I did, because I was such an annoying child, like so annoying, seriously annoying. I went to all the elders or the deacons, and I wanted them to defend this idea of a church being in debt in order to build buildings, because I was like, what is church? Is it the building? I'm telling you, I was so annoying, Paul. Anyway, um, but it's true. It's like you think about it, you get into this massive debt, and then it's like you have to justify the existence of this building. And whether or not God shows up, whether or not anything is really happening in this building, you still do this thing every Sunday.
Yeah. Well, and so you weren't at the channel yet. If you go back a year or two, I did a conversation with James Wellman, who is a professor in University of Washington, sort of a guy who's well, he's sort of a refugee from the death of the main line, and he's an interesting guy. And he wrote a book, High on God, which he studied the main line. He studied the megachurch movement, and the conclusion of his book was really rather startling to me, because he says actually this movement does a tremendous amount of good in the world. And so you talk about me not getting flustered. Well, maybe it's because I'm old. It's because I did the foreign missions thing and I did the mega church thing. Not that I pastored a mega church, but I
You
was
saw
very
it.
much in terms of church planting, and this was our goal, and we were reading all the books and we're doing all that stuff, because the denomination in the 1990s was like, Christian Reformed Church has to jump on this because this is going to save us, and it's just a failure for the
Right.
most part. And then the house. So I ran the whole gauntlet, and then the house church thing, the cell groups
Oh
thing.
yeah. Yeah,
And
yeah.
so
I was
and
there for
so
that.
I walked through all, and then it was Tim Keller, and now it's Jordan Peterson. So I'm just a freaking meme following the current right along. But you see enough of this stuff, and you begin to say, yeah, there's something to that theater. It has its value. It
Mhm.
has its value.
Yeah.
Just don't make it everything. And that's sort of what I look at. So then when the Catholics and the Orthodox, big C Catholics and big Orthodox come at me, and I say, yeah, your tradition, it has its value. And
Mhm.
and all of these things have their value, but it's this dynamic of constant constantly taking the gifts of God and turning them into idols,
Right.
is where it's like, no, it's always Jesus alone. It's
Yeah.
it's it's just you can't get behind him.
That was, I
So
think, the most potent thing about Pajot's speech was that whole part of idolatry, how he flipped the script, or
yeah,
he flipped the idea of what idolatry is. And that's been so useful, man, to me. I mean, when you rerun things through that
yeah,
that perspective, yeah.
yeah.
And it's so true.
So all right. We've got little time left. I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to get into or anything you wanted to ask, because again, usually sort of the story
Mhm.
takes center stage, and then we go from there.
Well, yeah, we talked about a lot. Well, I did wonder, how long have you known Freddie? Was he part of your church for a
Freddie was born and baptized as an infant in this church.
really? How
Oh
old
yeah.
is he now? Are you allowed to say?
He probably wouldn't like me saying,
Okay.
but
Do
because
you think he's older or younger than me?
I don't know how old you are.
I'll be 40 next month.
He's older than you.
Okay. I
Um,
can't really tell.
no, I know, and he likes it that way because he's very much a kid at heart.
And
But
then the older guy, the singer,
oh, Dave's new. So Dave,
he's
I
new.
gotta, yeah, I gotta. He was a regular commenter on the Freddie and Paul show, because I do read the comments and I pay attention to
Uh-huh.
account names. And so he was a regular commenter on the Freddie and Paul show when there weren't a lot of them. And his comments stuck out at me. And then one day, um, he shows up at church. I didn't even know he lived in the area. And
A
um, and
stalker.
and then he and Freddie have become friends, and so they go out to lunch together. And
They remind me so much of my family. Like I think that's why I even like love watching that, is because I got my family's from Southern Illinois, and it's we consider it like very backward, and like
Yeah.
people would call them, you know, they just write them off like they're just worthless hillbillies or something.
Yes.
And I like my uncle is a professional trapper who, you know, he'd show he loved it because he thought I'm a city kid. I wasn't from the city, but he thought I'm a
Yeah.
city kid. He would love bringing me dead animals and stuff, and couldn't understand a word he was saying. He talks
Yeah.
like Boomhauser, you know, on King of the Hill or whatever that guy's name is. Anyway, so like when I watch them, it's just like that feeling of like when you sit around the living room and like they're playing music and they're talking, and I don't know, I just love it. I love it so much. I can't even tell you. And like I
Well,
like rail country.
if
I
you
feel the
visit Living
same.
Stones, you can probably talk your way. If you leave a comment, you can if you leave comments on the Freddie and Paul show, you can probably get on the show. Otherwise, Freddie's a little someone comes in and maybe if they bring a peace offering, but no. And the Freddie and Paul show, I mean that if someone looks at my channel, goes back through videos, you'll see that the Freddie and Paul show started before the whole Jordan Peterson thing.
No, I know. I mean, well, I did the same thing with you, Paul.
No.
I binged all of your stuff too, so I didn't want to like don't want
No,
to be
not
like a
all of the
stalker.
stuff. I've
Not all of it. It's impossible.
It's
It's
impossible.
impossible.
I like it that way.
Yeah. But I did. I saw the Freddie and Paul show. I just didn't know what was going on. Um the same
Yeah,
thing
and
with
that's
Grim
good.
Grizz. I understand. It's good. I guess it takes a while to understand Grim Grizz, but I feel like the first time I was on his video or like watching a live stream, I commented, were we supposed to drop acid before watching this or something? Like I feel like if you're watching, you go into the movie theater and you didn't know it's a 3D movie and you need the glasses. Um, so, but I still watch them because I think one day I might know what he's talking about.
Yeah, well, he's like Peugeot in that when I first started watching Peugeot, it was like it was I had to it took a while to sort of okay. And I still have that. Sometimes I'll go back and I'll watch an old video and I'll see that I have been changing along with the conversation.
Mm.
And so, yeah, no, Grizz is a genius. He really is. But you know, so one of my I mentioned one of my older videos about, um, simple Christians and sophisticated Christians. And that is something that I learned very early on. I learned it from my father because my father's also a minister and his memoir is available on Kindle.
Yeah, I've heard
Chad
you
managed
talking
to get a
about it.
hard copy, which
Mhm.
is and it's a I if I ever get the time, I would like to edit his book because it could use some good editing because it's too
Mhm.
long. But he just wanted to
Yeah.
get all the stories and actually can only get the stories that are publicly presentable. So um because he's got some, but I grew up with his stories and, life in Patterson was, I mean, you had these African Americans coming up from the South and Patterson, if you listen to the Hurricane, Bob Dylan song about Hurricane Carter, that was in Patterson about the same time I was
Wow.
growing up. And there's some, there's an angle to Dylan's song on there too, because life is always more complex. But I grew up knowing in church that there were saints around me that would never be known by the rest of the world. And so when I started doing the channel and Randos started coming up, part of the reason I wanted to share Randall's conversation on the channel was, at least to a small degree, I want the world to know about some of these saints. And all of these saints are sinners. They're
Mhm.
all sinners. And they've got sometimes huge issues in their lives. And they can be moral issues, they can be doctrinal
Yeah.
issues, they can
Mhm.
be, but God has a way of working through things, which is really incredible. And you see this in, this is part of what's fun about the mining that's going on in classical, patristic, and medieval period, because you find some saints in there. And one of the authors that best sort of captured it was Frederick Buechner. I loved. Have you ever read the book Lion Country?
Mm-mm.
Pick it up. You'll love it.
Okay.
And it's part of, it's a much bigger book of Beb. So Beb is this character that he makes up that's running a diploma mill out of Florida, of course, Florida. And it may be, there's suspicions of maybe a child molestation case against him because he's got to go to the edge. And then there's also rumors that he once raised someone from the dead. And so Buechner puts both of these together, and Lion Country is kind of the first book. A reporter hears about this, and a reporter decides he's going to travel down to Florida to debunk and expose and hopefully get this guy into jail.
Mm.
And the guy goes down to Florida, and he is by no means prepared for what he finds, and he can't get his mind around Beb.
Sounds like Javert and Jean Valjean.
Yeah, but it's in northern Florida, which of course in Florida, the more you go north, the more you go south.
Yeah.
So and Buechner captures that. And Buechner had a way of capturing, aspects of this. I think he also wrote this book called Godric, which is basically, this is long before I found Jordan Peterson or Peugeot or any of this stuff. And I read that book, Godric. And again, it was trying to write, it's basically a person from our time trying to get his head around the weirdness and wildness of a medieval saint.
Right.
And I think that part of the reason why we're seeing new life in Christianity around characters like Peugeot and Martin Shaw and Paul Kingsnorth and Jordan Peterson is and John Vervaeke is because that wildness is reemerging. And Justin Brierley, as a journalist, is kind of on the hunt for this thing. That wildness is reemerging as the scaffolding that had sort of obscured it is crumbling and falling apart. So anyway,
Yeah, I think too, I don't know if it's because I'm very high in openness anyway, or if it's just my life experience, but it's like, even like the guy who abused me when I was little, like being able to forgive a person like that, because I'm able to, for whatever reason, I'm able to see a person in all the complexity that is human existence. And when I look back in history, and I know people like to cancel people because of the things that now we're completely offended by, and I feel like I've always just been able to see people in the context of where they were and where they are. And also because I know that my own inability to overcome things in my own life, there's just a certain kind of humility, I think, that is required of us in dealing with each other, because is there hope for those people that I sure hope so. And I hope that, I think too, we know in a sense that when we hear these stories of radical forgiveness, radical reconciliation, we're so moved by it, and we recognize it, that there's something deeply, profoundly good about it, whether or not we think that person deserves to be forgiven or whatever. Something within our entire body responds to that, and we think that is God. And so I think I'm right there with you. And I think especially with Christians who maybe they've been raised in a very narrow sense of what it means to be a Christian or a follower of Jesus. I feel lucky because I think my exposure was right away. Youth with a Mission was people from all over the world. I saw so many different views. When I was in Africa, my room had 6 different countries in it. That'll change how you view people, and what each culture thinks is okay or not okay, and you got to figure out how to live together.
No, and I think that's one of the things that Peterson got right when he said, when you visit Auschwitz, if you're walking through that place saying, it's terrible what those people did, when you visit Auschwitz, you should say, I'm capable of this.
Mhm.
This isn't these people aren't a different species from me. And so when we see these stories of radical forgiveness, we can begin to believe that that can reach even me.
Mm.
And that is so powerful. Have you read Corey Ten Boom's The Hiding Place?
Yeah. It would be a long time ago.
Yeah. I every now and then, well,
She's
because
the
I'm
one
always,
who met the,
yes,
I mean,
because the story just
I've
unfolds
cried
about,
every time I've heard that
yeah.
story.
I mean, as she tells the story, you just see how much she loved her sister and what a saint her sister is. It's almost an hagiography for about her sister. And then her sister is killed. And then she's, and sort of a nice evangelical thing. She's on her mission about Europe. And then a guard responsible for her sister's humiliating death comes and is happy to receive this forgiveness, that and oh gosh, every time I get to that point in the book, it's just like
Yeah.
I can't take
Like,
it.
would you,
It's
well, and so, I mean, not to keep going, but like, this is what I think I feel this urgency about is I feel like we are approaching something that will be so, I mean, we have an election, we've got wars, we've got rumors of regional wars that could easily go into the World War III. And I just think about, is the church, are we in a place where we're going to be able to look across at another human and see them as a human, or are we
yeah,
going to dehumanize people by reducing them to their ideologies?
yeah,
And are we going to treat people's ideologies um, as a license, like that they no longer deserve to live because they
yeah,
don't think right? And I
yeah,
see a lot of that
yeah,
on all sides, and it
yes,
frightens me. And I think, well, the only cure for that is the actual gospel that I'm not
mhm.
sure that a lot of Christians have heard. And I'm not, yeah. So,
Yeah. Herd is,
oh,
and this
no, maybe
coming
not
from
the
a
right word.
preacher. This coming from a preacher.
Sorry, not
Herd,
the right word.
because hearing, I mean, it just gets into that whole question of, what did Jesus know? Okay, talk to me about knowing, because
Mm,
part of what John Vervaeke brought to it is, well, there's four P's of knowing. And so suddenly, and you realize that as a person, okay, do you know this? Well, what, I mean, in many ways, and Peterson was right, you don't know it until you act on it, and that's actually
exactly.
faith. But again,
Right.
it can't be reduced to believism.
Right.
It's so, and in that sense, again, it's it comes down to God's grace to us,
Yeah.
and
No,
living in
you're
that
right.
giftedness. So anyway, I don't know, where is it time to land the plane, or you got anything else you want to put out there?
I mean, I think I covered it.
Okay.
I'm so appreciative of what you do, and I don't want to be like stroking your ego or whatever, but I just don't know if you, and I'm sure you do to some degree, you probably hear it a lot, like just your presence, the fact that you even exist out there, um, just means so much to so many people. And I know I've heard it said so many times, like how patient you are with people. And I can tell how much you love people. And yeah. And just thank you for even like responding to my comments and letting me harass you because I harassed you. But you know what? I've been able to like leave my church leaders alone. I told them, I was like, oh, I found somebody else to bug.
You can harass me. Yeah, but be
Yeah.
gentle. Be gentle on those poor church leaders. They have a big church to try to. They have
I
they have a
and
they have a big edifice to maintain. Um,
as do you, but I've joked with people too. I'm like, and in so many ways, I was like, PVK has been like so much of a pastor to me. Like you just have no idea.
well,
But I
thank you.
just deeply appreciate you.
Well, I thank you. I appreciate it. We will see where this whole thing goes. All
I'm here for it. I'm here for it.
right. All
Oh,
right.
one more thing.
Yes.
And also thank you because I know as much as people would love for you to like weigh in on political stuff, like the day that you do that, whether it's something I agree with, even if you were agreeing with me, I would be disappointed. You know what I mean?
I know. I
And
know. Well, I just saw that Preston Sprinkle seems to be talking about the question of, I think it's ideological capture and
Hmm.
political capture. It's a difficult thing because, and I tried to talk about it in terms of religion is dollars and politics is cents. And the reason that I talk that way is because we never fully escape the political, but we have to relativize it.
Right.
We have to make sure when we're talking politics, we're talking pocket change.
Right.
And
That's why I got so mad at Peterson. You know what I mean?
yeah.
I wanted him to not do that thing.
Yeah, yeah. And I
Even just,
can it's
yeah.
also different as because we also don't want Christians to not go into politics.
Hmm.
We can't go that way. So that, like many other things, is just, I
It's
mean,
fraught.
you talked about the chaos and order line. There are many such lines in life, and that business with politics is one of them.
I
And
think,
but
yeah.
again, I think the best guide to this is Jesus.
Mm,
Because if you read the Gospels, understanding the the political culture war that Jesus was enmeshed in,
mm,
and then you look at how he tried to walk through that minefield, I think Jesus is showing us how to do it.
yeah.
But you also have to remember that if you really do it like Jesus, they may very well kill you, because that is exactly
Did
how
you
the
watch
story goes.
did you watch The Chosen?
No, I have a
Um,
real hard time watching on-screen portrayals of Jesus.
okay, me too. I watched it on accident, let me tell you that. I After my dad died, I couldn't sleep. And I'd heard people talking about it. I thought it was some kind of a weird dystopian show.
Well,
So usually I listen to podcasts to fall asleep, but my brain was so loud I
yeah,
could hear my brain over it. So I thought I need
yeah,
something visual. Just turned it on, and now, like in the opening scene, I was like, "Is this about Jesus?" And at first, my thought was like, "I do not want to see a show about Jesus," but I couldn't stop watching it. It's one of the best. You've probably heard this, but I
yeah.
think it's
People
the
love it.
best
People love
portrayal
it.
of Jesus. What I was going to say is that something that they did so well was really give you that sense of what was going on politically. And all
Mm,
these different things, like on paper, make
well,
only so much sense, but you see them
yeah,
playing out with the centurions and what that would have looked like. And also, like in his within his disciples, that you had like a zealot and a tax
yeah.
collector, and they had to be having like raging conversations. They don't mention any of that, right? And that always fascinates me. um yeah, and I mean, I think you're right. And I think too that, I was talking to this young Ukrainian guy the other day that was
Yeah,
at my food trailer, and he was talking about when people start trying to get involved in a war stuff. He
yeah,
said by the time you're at war, he said that train is so freighted, and it's been coming from down here. It's barreling. It's got so much momentum. You're going to step in front of a train and you're going to get hit by it. And
yeah.
also, I wondered, is that where the word fraught comes from? Is it freighted?
Oh, I don't know. Could be.
I don't know. All of a sudden, that I was like, freighted
Yeah,
and fraught. They sound right. They sound like they should be the
yeah. They
same,
sound like, yeah, yeah,
because it's true. These situations are so freighted. They're carrying such a load that it doesn't even make sense to try to
yeah.
stand in front of
And the
them.
scary thing about the Ukraine situation is it wasn't that long ago. Although, the situation within the Soviet Union and those countries, I mean, the world is just so complex. And the truth is, to look in it from the outside, we know so little about it. That I think should sort of help us also have a bit of humility about these conflicts around the world,
Right.
that we know to a degree the resolution around our own conflicts with people who are very much like us. You know, even in a marriage. I mean, talk
Yes.
about a
I'm like, I can't even fix my problems with my husband. How I'm gonna go fix the world? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So a little bit of humility is in order.
Yep.
And also one of the things that even with my own denomination and the struggles there, I don't need to. I mean, there are times when I have to say vote on something at at a synod or a classis, okay, well then I've got to vote. And I guess for national elections, I got to vote too. But, you know, we can hold our things a little bit lightly and we can listen to each other when someone comes and says, yeah, but have you thought about this? And usually the answer is, no, I haven't. And that's a good point. So I'll throw that into the hopper too, and it'll all be in that big soup. And then someone comes on Twitter and is like, choose now. It's like,
I know. Well, and I feel like also like the more I understand about stuff, the more I realize how very little control I have over absolutely anything. That even
yeah,
if we were all to like vote in one direction, like
yeah,
there are
yeah,
all these like power plays happening. Like I had sent you a video and I won't like go over it, but that was another one of those examples of there could be like one little piece of a puzzle that someone hands you and suddenly you're like, I've got to redo this whole thing, you know?
yeah,
Um, and so then it comes back to Jordan Peterson and the 12 rules for life. I mean,
yeah,
getting your own room in order.
yeah,
And that's hard enough. But if enough people are learning to do the hard work of that and learning how to practice the way, go back to the John Mark Comer stuff. I don't know. That's where I'm trying to just focus my,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, because that's actually it's it's in your life with your husband, your children, your church, your coworkers, your customers. There's where the rubber hits the road.
Yep.
And can you I haven't done the video yet because there's been so many other things I've wanted to make videos about.
Because I'm taking up your time.
No, no, no. You gotta balance. You gotta do all these, you gotta keep all these stuff balanced. But the introduction, the first chapter of G.K. Chesterton's biography of Saint Francis. Not sure where was I going with that. It's his comment about Saint Francis was basically, he didn't. Dostoevsky makes the same comment. You know, Dostoevsky points out that people love humanity but hate people.
That's the woman who's confessing to the priest.
Yeah.
And she's saying, like, she's afraid, though, that she'll basically resent them for not being appreciative enough of her. And then that she was actually trying to ingratiate herself to the priest by even confessing that. And there's like 5 different layers right there. And
Yep.
yeah, I know exactly what you're talking
Yep.
about.
And that, first of all, you have to, loving the people around have to take priority, especially if you say you're a humanist. And then figuring out if you can do both, and to the degree that you can do both, that's really where it's at. And that's again where Jesus is so powerful, because he both manages to love the people around him and also all of us
Mm.
at the same time. So, and I know I just got some people with some of the Reformed doctrine, just I set off alarm bells because I've got those people in my head too. So we're not going to go any of those places. But and I know Luke Thompson is out there cheering somewhere, and he will be. So
No,
anyway,
he's interesting.
oh, Luke is very interesting. Luke is
He knows all like the doctrinal stuff. And it's like I've never paid attention to a whole lot of that because I was more interested in like getting my shit together. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, and that to me, someone just put out, I just posted it on Twitter. It was actually, he goes by the Discord name Charlie Brown. Stefan, I met him when I was in Germany last fall, and really cool guy. Really, so got to spend a little bit of time with him in Germany. Really, he just made a little documentary kind of the corner. And again, the reason, the cool thing about the corner is not watching videos. The cool thing about the corner is being able to make a few friends and being able to know some people like Luke and Sam and Grizz and Chad. And you know, that's the cool thing about the corner, which again, I did not sit there. I was so smart that I could design this. No, not at all.
I
It
know.
just,
Well, I envision it like, you talk about the hallway, which is that's like a analogy that I've used for a while too. And it's like, I peeked into a room and I saw this dude telling interesting stories around a fire. And then, a couple, and that's kind of like, And then I'm warming myself by that fire, and I have that imagery in my mind. When I come into the corner, it's like it's a source of honestly very real joy. I feel comforted. I feel like these are my people, even though I don't know any of them. You know what I mean?
Good,
In like
good.
Grail country, by the way. I Saturday morning, I'll be like, I'm like walking around the store, and I'll be like just tearing up, crying because of these poems that they're reading or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
Like I don't know, just lovely people.
Lovely
So thank
people.
you.
All right, we're gonna land the plane.
I'm
Food
done.
truck Emily, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing yourself. Because you are a worship leader, you already do this to a great degree, but they don't let you talk. So I'm glad we got a chance to
Well,
let
they
you
probably know
talk.
I talk a lot. That's probably it.
Yeah, and those mega church services, they're on a clock. You get this song has to be 3.5 minutes, no more, and then bing, 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 bing.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yep.
anyway, all right, Emily, take
Great
care.
seeing you in person.
All right, bye bye.
Bye.